Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema Podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle, and thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com, as well as the Sonic Cinema Podcast YouTube channel. We are coming up to the end of the Class of 1999 series, and there have still been a few films that came out later in the year that we had not touched on yet, and arguably one of the biggest ones and one of the more popular ones from that holiday season was Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia. And joining me to talk about it is a filmmaker that I've had on the podcast before. We discussed Fight Club earlier on in the series, and I'm pleased to be joined once again by Jakob Bilinski. Thank you very much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me, Brian. It's always a pleasure to be chatting movies with you.
I will go ahead and out myself right away and say that when I first saw this movie in 2000 is when I ended up seeing it because that's when it got its wider release. Mm-hmm. I was not the biggest fan of it. I wasn't really sure what I had necessarily seen. There were things about it that I really liked, but there were also things about it that I had issues with. So I knew when this was going to be one of the more interesting rewatches because of the fact that I had not seen it in about 20 years.
Oh, wow.
I'd since... So after... And I was also... At the time, I was also not a huge fan of Boogie Nights either. So after his first three films, I'd really liked Hard Eight, though. I will admit that. I wasn't a huge Paul Thomas Anderson fan, but once Punch Drunk Love came out, I really loved that one, and I've since become a big fan of his. And I revisited Boogie Nights a couple of years ago. I have more of an appreciation of what that movie's doing and how that movie does its business, and I'll fully admit that there were other issues that had nothing to do with the film that I was holding against the film, and I kind of feel the same way about Magnolia, but I still don't. I like it more than I did in 2000, but I still feel like there are kind of issues with it that I'm not quite as big of a fan of it as other people are.
Okay.
What was your experience with Magnolia when it first came out, and Paul Thomas Anderson in general at that time?
Okay, this is going to be a really interesting discussion, and I'm excited about it because we are total opposite ends of the spectrum here. I said it for Fight Club. This is the second time in this series that you have me on your podcast talking about. This is now the second film that I would rank in my top 10 of all time. Okay. I adore this movie. The second I saw it, holiday break, I was going to Murray State at the time. Yeah, same as Fight Club. It's like there were all these films that I was seeing, and I was in a very influential period of my life. I think we talked about this a little bit during Fight Club, where I was, because I'm an independent filmmaker, but that was a road to get to that. When I went to college, I was dead set. I either wanted to be an animator or a comic book artist. And so I went there for art, and I just started seeing all these films that changed my perspective of what a movie was. Cause I'll be the first to admit my taste in cinema back in the day was mostly shit. And I kind of got bombarded with all these movies that I was seeing my freshman year in Murray. And I met a lot of other friends that were had a very eclectic cinematic taste, and we were watching all these things I had never heard of before, and I was thinking, what is this? And my taste started to change, and then later that year, we got hit with Fight Club and Magnolia and everything, all the films you've been talking about, and it just sort of, that was a good year for not just film but selfishly for me watching film. And I saw Boogie Nights in high school, not when it came out, I didn't see it in the theater. It was way later when I was working at Blockbuster, and I rented it one night on a whim because I was like, oh, that's that movie about porn. Let's check that out. And because I remember everybody said it was good. I'm like, oh, I think you got an Oscar now. I remember thinking like, wait, wasn't this dude like 24 and he was at the Oscars or something? And I kind of thought, I think he was pretty young at that point when he made that movie. I don't know exactly how old he was, but he was
I don't
young.
remember exactly.
But I mean, so I could have my details wrong there, but I remember thinking, okay, no, let's check this movie out. And I really liked Boogie Nights. Like, it made me really uncomfortable because it was, obviously it's a very dark film, but like, it was dark to me because I realized I cared so intensely about his characters. And there was something about the way that his dialogue was, the way that his characters were fleshed out, where it just felt like, I still have trouble like putting into words. Like, it was just like a unique way of portraying people's stories. Right. Like, and how his camera is like constantly like rushing in. And I remember thinking, this guy really likes Martin Scorsese, doesn't he? But I don't know. There was just something about the language of Boogie Nights, like as a film that really spoke to me. And I was thinking, oh, that was cool. I saw Hard 8 because I was like, oh, let's see what else he's done. And I have come to really like that movie. When I first saw it, I was like, eh. But Boogie Nights, I dug. Then I saw Magnolia, and it was, I don't know, like I remember being pretty numb in the theater thinking, what did I just watch? I mean, I sat through like almost a 3.5-hour movie, riveted, couldn't look away. And I had a pretty short attention span at that time. So I now am a very, I think I'm a very patient movie watcher. Like, I can't wait to see The Irishman, because people, like, when they balk about runtimes, I'm like, I will sit through, I mean, now we're at the day where I'm like, I'll sit and watch an entire season if I don't feel like getting off the couch of a TV show and binge watch it on Netflix. So I'm like, I'll sit through like a 3, 4, 5-hour movie. I don't care. I sat through the full, the 5-hour TV cut of Bergman's Scenes from a Marriage and just didn't bat an eye. I was like, not bored at all. And I had watched the 3-hour theatrical cut the night before. I just like, like, if I like a story, I can't get enough of it. Yeah. So a lot of people were like, oh, what is this long movie? And it's really artsy and pretentious, but like it just clicked with me. I hadn't really seen anything quite like that at that point, outside of maybe Altman's Shortcuts, about these characters that are, brought together by circumstance and chance and interconnection. But like, I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk about specifics, but like some of the details stylistically of like the third act, which I have a lot to talk about when we get to it. Like, I liked it for a lot of reasons that a lot of my friends were like, what the fuck is this? And I went and saw it with my mom, weirdly enough, because like we'll watch anything together. And I remember when I was rewatching it now, I'm like, this is a weird movie to watch with your parents. But, yeah, it is. But then immediately, like, I went back to Murray and it opened there later, because I came home to Evansville for holiday break. And when I went back, it opened there. And I was like, guys, we have to go see this movie that I saw. So I brought literally everyone I knew. Like, we had like a whole row. And I don't think anyone quite loved it as much as I did, but they were all like, yeah, this is pretty cool. But my first experience was definitely different than yours. I mean, like, generically, I would just say I was immediately pretty much in awe. I have seen, I couldn't tell you how many times I've seen this movie, not nearly as many as Fight Club, but I actually watched it before our talk tonight, recently, this past weekend, and my girlfriend had never seen it, so I showed it to her, and she really loved it. But like, I realized that I hadn't watched that movie in probably, I don't know, it might have been like 5 years or something like that. It's been a while. Like, I haven't. There was a period where like I was watching it probably like once every year, every other year, but then I haven't seen it in a while. So revisiting it was as good, if not better, than I remember. It's one that continues to grow with me on each viewing, and like I kind of fall in love with it. So I'm definitely more of a fan of it than you are.
So okay, this actually came up when I did my Class of 1999 episode for Summer of Sam earlier this year. So if you heard that episode, you have also heard the story about why I felt the way I did about Boogie Nights when it first came out. So when I did go see Boogie Nights in theaters. I was interested in it. I'd seen Hard 8 in theaters earlier that year. I liked it. I thought it was good. So when I had seen Boogie Night, so before I had seen Boogie Nights, I had seen Goodfellas like a week and a half before.
Oh,
And
for the
good
first time?
and yeah, for the first time. And Goodfellas floored me. I was
Oh, yeah. No, I remember my
so
first
blown
viewing of
away.
that one. Yeah.
I was so blown away by that movie. And so when I was watching Boogie Nights, all I could think is, well, this is just Goodfellas in the porn industry. And I just couldn't get that image, that idea out of my head, and it clouded everything about how I feel about the movie. Now I looked at it and I'm like, okay, I appreciate the movie. I appreciate the filmmaking that Paul Thomas Anderson's doing more. I appreciate the performances more. I appreciate the way he tells the story more. I'm still not the biggest fan of it, but I like it more. I respect it more as a piece of filmmaking on its own.
Okay.
Magnolia, I think part of it was I don't think it was I don't think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I had seen Shortcuts by the time Magnolia had come out, and I loved Shortcuts. I thought Shortcuts was amazing. I didn't have the love for it that I had with Goodfellas, so I don't think that really clouded my feelings on Magnolia. I think part of, and we'll go ahead and dive into it. There are, I think the 3 hour is, even though I have no problem watching 3 hour movies at all, if I'm interested in a movie like you, I don't mind how long it is. 3 hour movies. 3 hour movies that I'm engaged in, that I'm fully engaged in, move with the speed of a bullet.
Right. I think if you're looking at the runtime or thinking about how long it is, then that's something about either the pacing or how the film's connecting to you. Because I'll if it's an hour and a half, if it's 4 hours, if I'm into it, I'm into it.
Right. So I think with Magnolia, part of it is it had nothing to do with the runtime, but it had a lot to do with the fact that there are subsets of these characters, these groups of characters that I am more interested in than others. And and it basically boils down to, if there are certain stories going on, I'm much more interested in them than others. And that's still kind of the case, although, like, the big one that I really was not a huge fan of was the story with John C. Reilly as the cop, and then
Melora Walters,
the daughter. Yeah. And I wasn't really that I wasn't really that engaged with that relationship, and that the way those two characters the way that storyline unfolds. I'm still kind of not. It's still one of the ones that kind of takes me out of the movie. Okay. Taking me out of the movie is not it's not the proper way of putting it here. I will say.
No, you're okay.
Well, I mean, even thinking about it, it's like that's not exactly like taking me out of the movie. It doesn't mean I'm interested to see where to a certain extent, I'm interested in what's next, partially because I couldn't remember what came next a lot of this time, because it does move back and forth between all the stories, which is fine. I love when movies do that, and I love when I feel like movies do that successfully. And there are times in this movie that Paul Thomas Anderson does it absolutely beautifully. And there are characters in this movie that I think are some of the best written he's ever done. Especially the character of Frank Mackey that Tom Cruise plays. I think Phil Baker Hall's character's terrific here. I think Philip Seymour Hoffman is wonderful in this movie. William H. Macy, I think, was one of those stories that I wasn't as interested in 2000. I appreciate it much more now.
Okay.
For what he does, and I like the way that sort of resolves. I think it held my interest more this time around. And at the same time, you have Julianne Moore's character, and she was one that I really got into that story because it's part of the main. I feel like if this movie has an A story at all, it's kind of the one with Frank Mackey, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Jason Robards, and Julianne Moore. If there's an A story at all, I feel like it's the biggest. I feel like it's the one that controls the most screen time of the movie, at least, even if it's not necessarily the most important.
Sure.
But at the same time, I watched, and there are some scenes with Julianne Moore in this movie where I think is really well done, and her performance is terrific. But there are other times where I wasn't as impressed. My memories of the movie of her performance didn't hold up quite as well. It was kind of interesting. But that said, I will go ahead and say this. Tom Cruise should have won the Oscar for this movie.
For supporting actor? Oh, God, absolutely.
I think it is the best piece of work he has ever done as an actor.
I wholeheartedly agree. Like, and I actually really like him as an actor. I mean, like how like I was very excited to see who was it that put out the list of like the best performances of the past decade recently. Did you see that? Yeah, but I mean, did you see how like they were doing that? They did like the best films and they did the best performances, and Tom Cruise was on there for Mission Impossible Fallout, and I was like, I'm really happy about that because I totally agree with it. But so like, you know, like I've always been a fan of him, but this is for me the best work that he's done.
Yeah, and 99 was, I mean, and the thing is, I think he does really good work in Eyes Wide Shut too.
Yep.
It's just completely different from the type of work that you see here. And I love that. I love that even like he was one of the biggest stars in the world when this movie and Eyes Wide Shut.
Oh yeah, well you got to think, yeah, because this happened, and this is like his hair, as long as it was, he was I think just going into filming Mission Impossible 2, which came out the next year. Yeah. So it's like, you know, he was sort of like, oh, you're taking a blockbuster break to go do, you know, okay, yeah, sure, yeah, play this character, and you know, the guy from Dead Boogie Nights' new flick. So yeah, he was, I think, probably like, I mean, he's never really not been at the peak of his career because he's still one of the biggest movie stars in the world. But yeah, he was on a really big high at that point.
Oh yeah, definitely, and it's funny because of the fact that he was coming off of that really long shoot for Eyes Wide Shut. I think the shoot finished in '96, if I remember correctly, and the movie hadn't come out yet. And then Kubrick died, and it's like, oh, is that going to delay release and stuff like that? And it's funny because of the fact that, I mean, as soon as people caught wind of his performance in this movie, like the relative, I mean, Eyes Wide Shut was kind of a failure when it came out. It wasn't as critically well received as people thought it would be, even though it was a wonderful film.
Oh no, it's beautiful. It's actually it's fighting with it, but it's very close to being my favorite Kubrick movie. I think a lot of people at that time, to touch on that, were probably like, oh, let's go see the new Tom Cruise Nicole Kidman movie, and they had no idea what a Kubrick movie was, and they're like, okay. They're like, what is this shit? And I'm like, this is what you came to see. What were you thinking?
Oh, I know. It's like even at the time, like I read as much as I could about the movie, and so like it occurred to me when the movie came out, I loved it immediately. I thought it was wonderful, and it's like I remember a lot of the conversation was I think people were seriously expecting like a porn film from Stanley Kubrick, and I'm like.
Yeah, and you thought like we're gonna see Tom and Nicole get it on, and it's like, well, I mean, that's not okay. I mean, that's sure if that's what you're the one bringing that baggage to the theater, so that's fine.
But this is one of those things. But going back to Magnolia,
Yeah.
this is such a it's funny because of the fact that I find out I'm finding that some of the people like you and other people that I'm doing multiple movies with, the movies that some of the movies that we're doing are sort of interconnecting in really weird ways.
I totally thought that. I've been holding off on commenting that, but as I'm watching it, I'm like, oh my god, this is perfect to follow up after we talked about Fight Club. Because
and
it's
the
weird.
reason comes down to Frank Mackey's character.
Oh yeah, like this is like another examination of toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, yeah, because Mackey is basically like an incel motivational speaker.
Oh yeah, he's like id fired up to 11 or something. Yeah. It's but it's so interesting because again, like I said, I've seen this one several times, and like I said, I was showing it to my girlfriend for the first time, and it gets to like the introduction of Tom Cruise's character. Well, I mean, you saw him a little bit on the infomercial in the opening vignettes where you saw all the characters briefly, and she's like, "What's this?" I'm like, "Just give it a minute." And then they're playing like the 2001 music, and he just motions at his junk and comes out with the best opening line to introduce the character, and she's like, "What the fuck is this?" I'm like, "You got to give it a minute." She's like, "Fuck this guy." I'm like, "You got to give it a minute." She's like, I'm like, "Talk to me when the movie's over," because it's like. Like he starts off like that, but then you start to kind of realize what made him that way and the interconnection he has with the other characters, and you're like, of course you grew up like that, broken, and then how you realize at the end when he's okay. Like I'm trying to focus and not be all over the place here because I was earmarking several things that you were talking about there that I wanted to comment on, like when we were just going through this movie. So this is going to be a little like stream of consciousness, but. Like at the end, because we're gonna talk about stuff and ignore spoilers. Right. At the end, when he's watching his father die, like that breakdown is one of the most genuine, honest breakdowns and repressing of emotion and losing to that repression that I've ever seen committed to film.
Mm-hmm.
Like when he's just like kind of like he didn't want to come see him, and he of course it's like, oh. The son's coming because it's the father's dying wish to see his son one last time. And they even comment on that. And I love how self-reflexive and aware the movie is, where it's like, like, oh, this is that scene. It's a little trite, but they even say like, oh, you would believe that doesn't happen if that was a movie. But these things do actually happen all the time. And even like Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, when he goes, see, this is the scene in the movie where you help me, where it's even like literally calling attention to, okay, there we go. This is that scene in the movie, which beautifully, if I remember correctly, kind of breaks the end of Act 1. I love how the movie's acts are broken up, where they sort of like, okay, we're in the first part, we're in the second part, we're in the third part. But when we get to Frank watching his father die and just saying, "I'm not going to cry for you," and just desperately trying to hold it back, I don't know what Tom was like thinking of when he was trying to channel that. I don't know what Paul talked to him when he was directing. I can't imagine how the preface for that moment before the camera rolled went, because it is so raw and honest. I'm watching it and it almost feels like it just happened. It doesn't feel staged. I don't feel like that was in the script. I know it is. I've read this, like I know it's there. You don't feel like, oh, that was talked about. Of course it was talked about and discussed and rehearsed and staged, but it's like it feels so organically honest that it's uncomfortable to watch. And that scene, every time since the first time I saw it, just breaks me. Like Magnolia is on my list of, if you put it on, I'm gonna fucking cry. Like it like that sequence makes me bawl. But well, okay, it's something I realized this time. I'll come back to that in a minute because it's a different part. But with everything with Cruise's character, with Frank, like how he breaks apart there, and you finally see all the layers dissolving away of this persona that he was trying to be, to the point that he literally changed his name because his name isn't, his name isn't Frank, he changed his name from what his father knew him as. And, and like you start to see it a little bit after he had the interview with a woman who like was like asking him about his father, and like, well, no, we learned that your mother actually died, and that whole thing where it ends with him saying, "I'm quietly judging you. I gave you my time," and then he goes back out to his sycophants and like like, oh, you want to learn how to, which is like literally, especially. It's interesting to watch it with today's eyes and today's lens, because like that is, back then it was unacceptable, but now it's like this is like literally the poster child for how not to be as a man, but really just as a person. Because it's so garbage. Like when that one guy's like, she said she just wanted to be friends, and he pats her on the back and says, I don't think there's one of us in the room that doesn't know all that kind of pain. We're going to show you how to use my tools to get Denise to, the fall. And you're like, this is how stalkers and rapists are born. It's awful. But like they play it with like this level of comedy, but you're like, this isn't funny, but still Tom Cruise's character is so charismatic in how he does it. But like right then when he gets up after having that interview, just to have this, to kind of like preach at them and get them all riled up. And he starts saying like, men are shit. Yeah. And and then he says, okay, hang on, you're going to go to your books. No. Wait, you're going to go to your white books, and he like makes a mistake, which almost feels like it's like a one take, and it almost feels like he forgets his line. Yeah. When he says the wrong, he's like, go to your blue books. No, wait, go to page 52 or whatever he says in your white books. And he's like, God damn it, and gets mad at himself, turns, flips the table, and he goes, I want you to go to whatever page in your white books. How to fake like you were a nice and caring person, or whatever that line is. And you're like, that is so literal that it's kind of brilliant. That it's like, what he's telling them to be is what he's really just showing the walls that he's built up around him of this persona of, I want to be this person because who I actually am has experienced too much hurt. I'm not excusing his behavior at all. Like how he is terrible, but the way that those layers fall off, and like I look at his performance in this movie as a whole, from like that arc beginning to end. It's like an onion. It gets so much more complex to the end, where he is just like a reduced, sniffling, broken, utter human. Yeah. And like and when that movie starts, if you're like, I'm going to sympathize with Tom Cruise's character by the end, you're like, bullshit. But I dare you to not. I dare you to not, because it's done. So, his story is told so well, and it's like it makes you think. And they kind of do the opposite with some other characters like Philip Baker Hall, who you have sympathy for the whole time, and then find out, wait, you molested your daughter, and then you're like, how did I feel for this character leading up to now? And you're ready to disown him, but it's like, but you still followed his story up to that, and it's like it screws with your emotions, like almost on a Breaking Bad level of like that kind of a character arc, where you're like, depends on where you're introduced to a character and how they end up, and it's I don't know, it's such fascinating storytelling to me. But
I mean, this movie, go ahead. And this movie is all about, and this movie is all about broken people. It's all about people who they can't make peace with choices that they've made, or choices other people made for them to a certain extent, and
whether they're victims to themselves or to other people's circumstances.
And the most heartbreaking thing, I think one of the most heartbreaking things about Phil Baker Hall's character is he doesn't say I molested my daughter. He genuinely has put a cloud. What he says is, I don't remember if I did.
Yeah, but it's like but the thing is, that's enough.
Basically him giving himself away to
exactly.
And the fact of the matter is, he's trying to repress what he did to his daughter to cause her to pull apart from them.
Right.
And I mean, it's weird that it's interesting that all of these characters, all of the main characters, end up having this thing that connects them, even though they don't necessarily know everybody. The game show is ultimately what connects them.
Yeah,
because they're all connected to that in one way.
Exactly. Yeah, like with Earl Partridge, like Jason Robards' character, produced the show that Jimmy Gator, Philip Baker Hall, like hosts, that the kid is on, that, you know, like, you know, it's so beautifully interconnected. And like, I love that you said, like, it's just about broken people, because that's actually how I described it. When I told my girlfriend, I was like, hey, we're going to watch Magnolia. She's like, well, what's it about? I go, it's a very beautiful movie about very broken people. Yeah. That's all you need to know. I was like, and that it really is like, it's one of those, like I said, it kind of hurts to watch, like those levels of interconnection, and how, like, you know, like these circumstances, it kind of makes you think, like, wow, whose life did I interact? Like, you know, like you cut someone off in traffic, or, you know, you're shitty to someone because, like, your order was late at, you know, at the restaurant, or, you know, like, or someone cuts you off in traffic and you yell at them. It's like, but you don't know their day. It's like, you start to think about, like, all these little chance circumstances throughout your day. You're like, well, how is this interrelated? And it's like, we're really just all, you know, people trying to be happy and get by, like breathing the same air in the same space and bumping into each other, and sometimes causing catastrophe intentionally or unintentionally. Yeah. And it's like, the movie really is kind of a beautifully intimate expose on the human condition, I think. Mm-hmm. And I like, it's one that sort of, it grows with me each time. Like Frank's character has always been a mainstay of, like, how I reacted to that. Like that from the beginning, that's only either stayed the same or grown over time. But like I said, I hadn't watched the movie in several years. And, you know, like, as you grow and you live, you know, like, you know, you're a different person. You have different life experiences that you're going to bring to a viewing, whether or not you know the movie. Like, you know, like, you have different baggage. You're a different person. You've experienced different joys, different heartaches. And, you know, and sometimes I love it when a movie can kind of catch you off guard with a reaction that I'm like, I've seen this like 100 times, figuratively, not literally, but like but I've never had that reaction before. Yeah. And you had commented on how you weren't too into John C. Reilly and Melora Walters' characters, and I am really, really into it. I've always really just liked John C. Reilly's character and his arc, and I've loved their relationship, and, like, you know, again, understanding how she is so damaged and broken. And I got a soft spot for love stories with broken people, you know, about like people like one of my favorite love stories, if this tells you anything about me as a person, is Leaving Las Vegas. Yeah. where, you know, like, it's like people that are just, like, so damaged and broken that they're actually perfect for each other, but they can't save one another. Like I love that shit. Like, I respond to it a lot. I don't know why, but I do. Yeah. And I kind of get that from their characters. And that scene at the restaurant at the end, before we get to, not yet, we're not ready yet, but eventually we'll be talking about the raining frogs. Yeah. But before that happens, when they're at the restaurants, and she comes back after running to the bathroom to do some coke, and tells him and kisses him, and she's like, I wanted to do that, and he's like, I'm glad. She says, now that you've met me, would you object to never seeing me again? I literally just started out of the blue crying, like, watching it this time, and I don't know why. Yeah. And there was something about, like, their date, and how, like, you know, how they met, you know, wherever, like, you know, like, the look on his face whenever he first sees her in the doorway, I've always responded to, and how he wanted to ask her out, and then, like, his CB radio going off, giving him away and causing him to, well, I have to go back up to the door. And that almost, like, hesitant, like, yes, please leave, but also, yes, I want to do this. Why didn't you ask me before? I thought you were flirting with me, like, when he asked her out on a date. She's like, how about tonight? Because it's like, almost, if you have time to think about it, you'll realize I'm too damaged and you won't want to. So it's like, you know, it's almost like, do it now, rip the Band-Aid off. Right. And then at the end of that, she's like, now that we've done this, I have to end it. And it's like, it hurt so bad. And I was so into that moment of them at the restaurant that I just broke. And that's before we get to Frank's scene with his father. So I went into that crying and double broke. So, like, that had never happened to me. I'd never had that reaction to that. And I started thinking about, because a friend of mine put a thing on Facebook recently. He's like, hey, all my friends sound off on your favorite music moments from movies, whether it's score or needle drops. And, you know, I, of course, responded with a laundry list of, well, how about this and this and this and this and this? Because I was like, you screwed up. You shouldn't have asked that when I'm your friend. So, and I realized that one of the first ones I put on there was the ending shot of Magnolia. Which at some point we got to talk about Amy Mann's songs in this, but anyway, like, when it ends on "Save Me," and it's that single slow push in of John C. Reilly coming to talk to her, and Jim coming to talk to her, and he, I was trying to remember his character's name for a sec, when and he you don't really hear everything that he says because the soundtrack is turned up loud enough that you only catch part of the words, but it doesn't matter because we're just hanging on her expression.
Yeah.
Leading up to that brief fourth wall, like look and smile break before we cut to the credits. Like that song choice with that moment is one of the most beautiful, heartfelt ending shots I've ever seen in a film. And I realized that it's because I love that ending shot so much. That's what made that restaurant scene work like so much more for me this time, because I think I was recently thinking about that ending and, you know, telegraphing where it was going to end up. There was just those two characters really, really, really work for me. But at the risk of being all over the place, because I don't want to forget, you mentioned one thing that is probably my favorite thing about the film. This is the movie that made Julianne Moore my favorite actress.
Yeah.
I love her. I think she's every ounce of the definition of the word brilliant. And she's great in everything. Like even in shitty movies, she's great. Yeah. But like in this movie, I don't know, like just from the moment that she walks in and you get that beautiful like drifting shot of her brushing her hair back to kiss her dying husband on the forehead before she goes out, to every interaction with the lawyer and her guilt of she's cheated on someone. She's like, I never loved him, but I've fallen in love with him now and I have guilt and I don't want his money, which is like one of the most heartbreakingly honest, selfish things. You're like, oh, that's kind of a garbage thing to admit, but also you're kind of a good person for admitting it, because you're like, I don't want this. You're not bad. You really do love. And so it's like that arc of love, which we're denied of, we're only catching her on the tail end. So you try to think about her whole life leading up to that. And that breaks me thinking about it, you know, that like she started at one part and ended up, this is the end of her arc, to the point where she's suicidal because she can't deal with it. But like when she's going to the pharmacy and, you know, they're just judging her, and like, honestly, I wanted her to get an Oscar for that when I first saw the movie, that whole part where she's like, you call me lady, you can suck my dick. You know, like her just going off on the pharmacist. I was like, this is the best scene I've seen from 1999. Like I loved her performance in this. And it has held up with me. Like I was kind of intrigued when you were saying like you remembered it a little more rose colored and fondly, but like I think that she is like uncomfortably brilliant in this movie. But yeah, like I'm gonna let you talk because I've been rambling for a minute.
No, that's fine.
But like all these little bits, like it's hard for me to really, because it's like all these little short vignettes that are kind of beautiful in their own right. And you're right, some of them are more intriguing than others, because as much like one time I'll watch it and I won't be as much into like, you know, the kid on the contestant show, like, you know, I'm blanking on his character's name. I'm terrible right now. Stanley, thank you. Like I like there are times where I watch it and I'm just not into Stanley's story, but then this time I was like, oh, I was really into it. The stuff with him and his dad, and I was like, oh, and I like, you know, thinking about how that enhances William H. Macy's character, because we're basically seeing a grown-up Stanley there. You know, like it's got such interesting layers and beautiful character development that it's like it's hard for me to pick a favorite one. Like honestly, I'm shocked that he crammed this down to 3.5 hours, because it's like there's so much going on that like if I try to think about like this, if it had been like, I mean, I love it as a film and it's beautiful the way it is, but imagine like if it was like a Netflix series and you could do like a 10-hour story of this, you know, and like, you know, like flesh it out. Like, and I remember on the behind the scenes thing, have you seen the documentary that's on the Blu-ray?
I've not.
It's actually pretty good. It's like a little over an hour, but it's pretty in depth. But it's like when he's talking about the writing process, he's like, so I went and showed it to Bill Macy, and he read it. He goes, shit, Paul, this is really long. And he goes, I'm not fucking changing anything. And he goes, and then I showed it to the next person. They're like, Paul, this is a really long script. He's like, I'm not fucking taking anything out. And like, you know, he was just like, he's like, we're making this movie just like this. So it's, you know, I respect that there was like this. There's no moment in the movie that I don't feel like I'm watching like a singularly definitive vision. Like I'm a little bit of a like, I slightly worship the ground that Paul Thomas Anderson walks on. I'm curious to hear what you think of the rest of his films. We'll get to that later. But like I really feel like this was, he knew what he wanted, he knew what he was doing. And it doesn't work for everyone. I remember I said I was going to let you talk, but like, let me get this one thing. I'm sorry. Like, I remember back in the day, like I caught a couple times going to see Kevin Smith like do his stand up. You know, like just pre-Clerks to post Jay and Silent Bob and Jersey Girl. I don't remember, but anyway, I remember he came to IU whenever I was there, and he was talking about how much I forget what, but I actually think it's on one of his DVDs that he recorded, like where he talks about how much he hated Magnolia. He's like, this movie's fucking garbage, and just like kind of ripping it apart and everything, and like everything he's making fun of. I'm like, oh, you're funny, and I like you the jokes you're saying, but also I love that movie. And it's like it either is going to work for you or it doesn't.
Yeah.
So this is on a list of if someone doesn't like it, I'm not going to go out to try to convert them to be like, I think you need to agree with my opinion, because it's like it really is either going to work for you, it doesn't. It just really, really works for me.
Yeah.
There's some where I'm like, how can you not like that? But if someone's like, I don't like Magnolia, I'm like, I disagree with you, but fair enough.
So I will just simply say this as far as Paul Thomas Anderson's other work. I think what it boils down to is I think when he's focusing in on a handful of characters, I think he is absolutely one of the great filmmakers ever. Not even just of our time, just ever. Like, I love how in There Will Be Blood, he basically made a 2.5-hour epic that focuses in on two people. And the collision of two people. I think that is fascinating what he does. Now, granted, there are other characters in that movie. It's all about those people. And then Love, you have this relationship between Adam Sandler and Emily Watson that's just beautiful. You have other characters that fill in around them, but it's ultimately about those two people. The Master's the same way. Phantom Thread is the same way. I still have not seen Inherent Vice, so that's why I'm not including it here.
That would be an intrigue. I would, on a personal note, I'd be intrigued to hear your thoughts. I've watched it once, and I was like, I think I'm gonna love this movie in time. I need to revisit it later. So like, I've held off judgment. It was one of those where I'm like, I didn't dislike it. I didn't love it. I really think in time that one might be like to grow quite fun. But I like There Will Be Blood and Phantom Thread especially. I really love.
So
I love The Master quite a bit too, but like not as much as those other two.
Yeah, I would agree with that. As far as this particular film, what you said as far as, how different experiences and over time things change in your life. You're not the same person from when you first watched it, and that's definitely the case with me. I've been through some pretty heavy shit over the course of my life. And to the point where, I mean, hell, not even a year after Magnolia, not even barely even 6 months after Magnolia came out, like I basically watched my grandfather pass away from cancer. And I mean, that was a powerful experience for me because of the fact that it meant, not only because of the fact that how much he meant to me as an individual, but just the experience of, like, my other grandparents had passed away, but I wasn't, like, on the front lines for it the way I was with my grandfather. And but it was still really important for me to go through that experience. So it's interesting. I'm curious how I would have felt about this movie, like, even a year later. Having been through that experience... how I would have felt about this. I might have even realized, no, this is a better movie than you thought was at first. Sooner. But yeah, I mean, and I will say this about Julianne Moore. I agree with you. The scene where she's with the lawyer is just amazing. Mm-hmm. And the scenes at the end where she's, the pharmacy scene, I feel like it's maybe a bit overplayed, but at the same time, it's still a really good scene with her. And her fate, the fate of her characters is in the movie is really interesting. How that all happens and where her character's left and the way that all of these characters are left. And one of the things that's really interesting about the scene with the lawyer is that so much of her, so much of her as far as her guilt, but he's saying it's like, look, you can,
when he said you can renounce the will.
Yeah, you can renounce the will, but everything will go Frank, and she's like, he doesn't want that. He doesn't want that. It's like, and she doesn't know all of this stuff that's been going on between Philip Seymour Hoffman and Jason Robards. The character of Stanley and his father, you brought them up. This was probably, in this rewatch, I think this, coupled with Tom Cruise's arc in the movie, was probably the thing that floored me the most in this watch. And
this time it stuck with me more than it normally does too. I mean, I'm sure not, in the same way as you, but like, I had a similar thing where I was like, oh, that I haven't been into that storyline as much in the past.
Yeah. And the reason for that is the scenes where he is, how much he is stressing out on the set of the game show when he has to go to the bathroom. He's embarrassed he's embarrassed to say what he needs to do. And he says he wants to go bathroom, but they're filming, so obviously it's like you can't really go because we're filming.
And he's all like, we just do what you expect of us. We're kids. We're supposed to know the answers. I don't want to be the one to always know the answers. Why do I have to do? I don't want to be the one to go up there. How is that okay? And like that kid's performance is kind of uncanny. Like just the little subtleties of how he goes from sort of like soft and innocent to angry to scared. Like it's beautifully nuanced. Like
the thing that I made a point of, and it's a painful example of, it's a brilliant example. It's probably one of the best examples I've ever seen in a film of a character shutting down through anxiety and the pressure of everything that's being put on him from the other kids, from the people running the game show, from his father. Just, he basically gets to a point where he has to shut down. He's so anxious, and it's like, as somebody who has dealt with anxiety over the years, it's like, I completely get that. And it's like, that is, and the way he plays is amazing. And it was one of those things, and I will say one of the things I feel like after those big moments with him on the game show, I feel like Anderson kind of forgets those characters exist, and to a certain extent near the end, and it's really kind of disappointing because I don't feel like we get a really feel like there's a lot of stories take precedent.
Yeah. No. And I noticed that this time. I don't disagree with you there. Like, there's a lot of open ambiguity because what was the last we saw of Filmmaker Hall?
Yeah.
Frog fell. The gun went off. He shot the power outlet, and it started to smoke, and we didn't see again.
Yeah.
Did the house burn down? Did he die? Did he live? Do we know anything there? Yeah. Stanley and his last little interaction with his father. You need to be nicer to me, but we don't know what happens there. We get a hint that Frank is probably going to go visit Julianne Moore's character. Why? Oh my God! I literally Linda. That's right.
Yeah.
That he's you get the idea that he's probably going to go visit her, and there's going to be some kind of awkward something there. We know who lives, but yeah, there's we get the chance for redemption and hope for William H. Macy's character, but we don't get everything's not wrapped up in a nice little bun.
Yeah.
But also, speaking of William H. Macy's character, it hit me a lot harder than it normally did. But his whole I've always loved the whole bit, like the irony of his parents stole his money and he didn't know what to do with his celebrity, and he's so he keeps jumping around and he's working with. I always forget that Alfred Molina is his boss. I'm like, okay, Doc Ock, what's up? And also, I'm sorry, I just kept waiting for firecrackers to start going off like that scene in Boogie Nights. But anyway, but that whole scene where he's talking to him and his brother, and he's like, what do you mean? He's like, I need oral surgery. I need corrective oral surgery. Like, Donnie, your teeth are fine.
Yeah.
And he's but he has this idea of like he wants to spend money on this thing because he wants to impress this bartender guy that he has a crush on. And then, like when you see that he has braces, you're like, oh, that's what he wants to. It's like, you don't need braces. Your teeth are perfect, until he has a bit of like a moment of consciousness, crisis of conscience, and goes and tries to climb that pole to get back in to take the money back and falls on his face. And all of a sudden it's like, well, now you need braces.
Yeah.
And it's like I've always loved that arc, but that whole scene in the bar where he's like where he's kind of going back and forth like to get why am I blanking on his name, the bartender's attention,
with the anyway, older guy,
Henry Gibson, which speaking of which, it was weird watching this movie. I realized, oh, how many of you are no longer with us? Because I was like, oh, Jason Robards, oh, Henry Gibson, oh, Philip Seymour Hoffman. I just kept getting sad. Anyway, but yeah, like when he's like that whole sequence where he's talking with Henry Gibson, and like vying for the bartender's affection, is like, and when he's walking, he's like, I love you, Brad. He goes, Brad the bartender, I love you. He's like, I'll be good to you and everything. And he keeps saying like, I have love to give, I just don't know where to put it. And like, that whole like, it's not dangerous to confuse children with angels. Like, it's like that scene was really heartbreaking this time around. Like, I mean, I've always thought that was like, oh, that was a really kind of beautiful, dramatic moment, but it was just extra sad. And not to go off on too much of a tangent, but I really started paying attention to some background details that I hadn't noticed before, and starting to think about like, and this eventually I think could lead us to the frog talk whenever we're ready. But like they keep bringing up, which we kind of talked about a little bit, and like with the idea of like religion and like what is God and everything, like in Fight Club, but they keep bringing up, I think was it Exodus 8:2 or something in this. And the kid. Remember the kid that John C. Reilly's talking to, and he does that rap on the streets?
Oh yeah.
I remember reading something. I don't know if it's something that Paul Thomas Anderson said or it was someone's analysis, but they're like, if you listen to the lyrics of what he's rapping, he literally tells you everything that's going to happen in the rest of the movie. Yeah. Like it's like the entire movie condensed, and it's like saying like if it's worth if it's worth hurt, it's worth bringing pain in, and something God brings the rain in or something. And it's like Exodus, I think 8:2, because I looked it up afterwards, is something about, cause I don't know scripture, but it was something about like the rain of frogs, which I'm like, oh, well that ties to that. But then I started noticing there's a shit ton of 82s hidden in the movie. Have you ever caught that?
No.
Do you remember the very beginning, whenever there's whenever the narrator is giving the and then there's the case of Del Mar or whatever, like, you get Patton Oswalt like up in the tree when he's scuba diving, and like, and then when it does the part where the kid is jumping off the roof before he gets shot by his mom as he falls by their window, when it's doing that pushing on him, there are vines on the left that are kind of creeping up the side of what the step that he's on, the edge of the building, that are making an 8 and a 2. So it's like, and then I started noticing that there's all these little, and I was like, wait, is that the, and then when they brought that up later, I'm like, oh shit, he's literally telegraphing it through the entire movie of what's going to happen. But it's like, it's one of the, like, I love whenever I can find a movie where there's like shit that I didn't notice before. And it's like, oh, there's something new to take away. There's something new to take away. It's like that replay value of, why didn't I catch that before? I probably could have gotten on the internet and read someone else had caught it and then it pointed out to me. But the fact that I'm like, caught it on my own, I love little moments like that.
Oh yeah. And that's one of the great things about a movie like this. Even if I'm not the biggest fan of it, it's like, I can still admire that watching this movie more than once, I feel like I'm going to get a different experience. I'm going to get a deeper experience. And I mean, that is the thing that I appreciate about Paul Thomas Anderson as a filmmaker, because of the fact that even if I'm not a big fan of, this or Boogie Nights or something like that, there's definitely the work of a filmmaker with something to say. And it's something to say about humanity, and even if it's not something I'm particularly interested in hearing at the time, I will eventually grow to appreciate it a bit with just revisiting it. And that's and just this this talk, it makes me want to watch Magnolia, sometime in the near future again, just to see all of these different things, and to
it's
see
like
how it hits me this time.
Yeah, it's like it's weird because I just watched it Saturday, but like talking with you, like I almost want to revisit it again, and I just watched it because it's one of those where I'm like, I know it's near and dear to my heart, but I always forget how much I love it. But it's like you were saying earlier, like we both said, like we're at different points in our life when you revisit something. I mean, when I fell in love with this movie, and like I said, like it was kind of a love at first sight with this film. I mean, I was 18, I was a child, and like now I'm in my late 30s, and this is like you were talking about, like we've both had a lot of life experiences and are different people, so watching that with the same lens is really not possible. I can't. It's like how I did this. So like like me, and I've had that happen with movies, and it sucks because it's like a bad breakup, kind of where like oh man, I used to love this movie, and then you watch it and you're like, shit, why did I like that? And like you kind of remember it like ones that I'll dig up a movie that just gets re-released on Blu-ray that has been like out of print forever. Then I'm like, oh, I haven't seen that since I was in college. I remember loving that movie, and I'm like, yeah, my taste has changed. What was I thinking? But but then there's ones that's like, I guess what I'm trying to say, like you said, like with Paul Thomas Anderson, he's a filmmaker that has something to say when you watch his stuff. I agree with that, and I'm also going to tack on, he's a filmmaker whose work I can grow with. Yeah. Because I loved it at 18, and I love it for different reasons, like in my 30s. Like it's something that, which to me is sort of the definition of timeless, where like it's like you can experience this at different stages in your life as a human and respond to different things. There's stuff that in this movie that I didn't emotionally understand when I was that age. I was like, oh, this is that, but I'm like, I didn't know, like some of the loss and heartache that some of the characters experience. Have I experienced everything they've gone through? No, of course not. But a lot of that, I'm like, yeah, I get why, like certain character moments and reactions where maybe before you're like, oh, well, why was that? Oh, that was probably just because the script needed to. You're like, no, that's a normal reaction. I get why they did that. I get why they did that. I get why they had to leave the room. I get why they were mad at that person, where it's like, for whatever reason, like Julianne Moore, while I don't have the personal life, checkpoint reference for this, I remember always thinking it was sort of a little, well, she's a crazy person, even though I loved her performance whenever she made Philip Seymour Hoffman hang up the phone right when he was about to get Frank on the phone. And, she's like, this is between us and the family. You don't do that. And then later when she's apologizing for slapping him, I was like, is she bipolar? Is she crazy? And now I'm like, I totally get it. Like what? Like not because of my life experiences, but just like perspective. And as an adult, I'm like, no, I completely get why she had that reaction.
Right.
With what I understand of her character going through and how people are when they react to certain situations. And sometimes it's just, it gives perspective. And I like that he is a filmmaker that I can grow with, because there's like a startling level of maturity in his work.
Yeah.
And I mean, like even for me, even Boogie Nights, because like I said, I ran it because I was like, this is this movie about porn, let's check it out. But like, there's a lot of deep shit that's happening in that movie.
Yeah,
and it's beautiful. It was weird, total left field, but there's this series that I just finished watching on Netflix, which I was a really big fan of, called The Naked Director, which is about it's an 8-episode series about like in the 70s and 80s about the Japanese porn industry, and this based on a true story about this revolutionary director that changed the adult film industry over there. And I was watching, I was like, oh, this is like Boogie Nights in Japan, and it really is. And that's all I could think is, I'm like, this is like overseas Boogie Nights, but that's sort of like the comparison for, like, I find myself a lot of times thinking, oh, this is like something Boogie Nights. Oh, this is something Magnolia. Oh, this is sort of like a, like what, trying to do what There Will Be Blood did better. Like, and I'm thinking, just Paul Thomas Anderson is just a damn great storyteller. Yeah. Is really what it comes down to for me.
I did want to bring up one thing. We haven't said the line because it's, if you've seen Magnolia, you know the line that we're talking about when it comes to Tom Cruise's character. It's basically his mantra to his
Oh yeah, his
followers.
introduction. I know that we were allowed salty language on your podcast, but I was hesitant to throw that one out.
Oh no, that's perfectly fine. I will say, are you a fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
Okay, I have a pretty stacked nerd card, but that is one hole that I've never punched, and I tend to get made fun of a lot because people are like, "Jake, you would love it." I have never seen it.
Oh, it's all right.
I've seen. There was a class I took in college, and we watched the musical episode. That's literally all. It's just the musical episode. So like, I'm aware of it. I've never watched it. It's on my sometime I need to sit down and watch it list.
Okay,
but
and it's funny that you bring up that you watched the musical episode because in the musical episode, there's a very subtle riff on Frank Mackey's mantra that Tom Cruise gives to the character of Xander. It's very funny.
Catch that. Okay.
If you ever watch again, if you're a fan of the musical episode, when Buffy is walking into the magic shop shortly before they start like the group song where they're trying to figure out what exactly is causing everybody to sing in the town.
I remember the scene vaguely.
There's a very sly and subtle reference to Tom Cruise's mantra in that movie, in that scene. So
okay.
You'll pick it up if you're looking at you'll pick it up pretty quickly, and it's not really. Well, I won't spoil it, but yeah, if you.
Oh no, you're good.
It's really kind of funny actually, and that was one that I definitely picked up on because of the fact that it's like even somebody like me who was not necessarily a big fan of Magnolia at the time, I certainly remembered, the mantra Frank Mackey has, and so that was bouncing around my head when I watched the musical episode. And so yeah, it's pretty easy to see, but it's a pretty funny moment there. So I did.
I'm gonna have to check that out.
The moment where Jason Robards, we haven't really talked about him in this movie. He is like all of the performances in here are ultimately really fantastic.
Yeah, they range from really good to great to masterclass. There's really not anything where you're like, well, you missed the bar there. Some of them are slightly more perfect than others. So
yeah, the moment where he's trying to remember with Philip Seymour Hoffman really stood out to me watching it this time around.
Are you talking about that part when he's like, this is so goddamn boring? When he's when he's trying to remember and he's like, this is so boring and he can't remember. He's like, this is pathetic. I'm laying here trying to remember, and then he just remembers it. Yeah, it's so beautifully nuanced. Like, I don't know. It's so natural. It's like it's almost weird because I'm like, oh, Jason, you were one of the greats, and we don't have you anymore. But it's like I almost felt like he wasn't actually dying when they filmed that scene. Was it because it feels so uncomfortably real? It doesn't feel like he's acting.
Yeah,
it's such good acting that I don't feel like he's acting.
Right. No, and going back to Cruise's performance. I mean, we talked a lot about Cruise already at the beginning of the movie, but this might be sort of the most accidentally revealing performance of Cruise's career. Like when he's talking about his philosophy that he's imparting in the interview, like I couldn't help but think of him talking about Scientology that way.
Oh yeah, no, I couldn't help think about that, or like him interviewing Katie Holmes to like be like his wife or something. Yeah, it's like it's sort of like, oh, this is art imitating life or the other way around? Because it's such a vulnerable, raw thing, where I kind of thought that too a little bit. I'm glad you brought that up.
But yeah, the way that persona that he's built up for himself really just breaks down through the course of that interview. And then you're right, the scene after that, when he goes back out, tries to continue on with his pep talk.
Mm-hmm.
And
But he's kind of derailed a little bit. He's like flying one engine.
He's so rattled about it. And because in between that time, he's also, they've also gotten a hold of him. His assistants have at least told him that his father's nurse, Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, is trying to get a hold of him.
Yeah.
And so that rallies him a little bit further.
Right.
And it's just the way Cruise is really one of the most underappreciated actors. It's like I feel like especially with movie stars of that level, somebody like Cruise, and I was talking about when I talked about Payback earlier in this series with Mel Gibson. Like, both of those guys are just really underappreciated as actors. And
right. Well, because when you get so big, I think it's hard for an actor of that caliber, and I'd put Brad Pitt in there too, to escape their own celebrity. Where it's like when you see him, it's hard to like, oh, well, I see Mel Gibson, or I see Tom Cruise, or I see Brad Pitt. And when you really realize that they're disappearing into a role, it's sort of like, oh, but the thing with Cruise, which I'm going to put above the other ones we mentioned, that I think is like he kind of works against, is what is the first thing you think of when you think of Tom Cruise? Like, we could sit here and we could be like, oh, well, Magnolia, or Eyes Wide Shut, or Interview with the Vampire. But let's be honest, what's the first thing you think of? You're like, oh, probably Mission Impossible, or The Mummy, or like, or whatever was the most recent blockbuster thing that came out that used it. It's like he's sort of like, he's like such a big star that you think of him as like the action blockbuster guy. You're thinking of the dude that, how old is he now, that is still doing his own stunts, and like on the last Mission Impossible literally broke his foot in a shot and kept going, and they used that take in the movie where he's limping off with a broken foot because it just got the bone popped out. It's like he's that guy. He's like, he's a daredevil, grab life by the balls and whatever. But it's like, then you forget you can do these really beautifully, uncomfortably real and honest performances.
Absolutely.
That they disappear into. So I completely underappreciated. I absolutely agree. When people are like, Tom Cruise, I'm like, you got to give him the respect. Like, you can say whatever you want about his personal life or whatever, but I'm like, as an artist, I'm like, you don't fight me on how good he is. You don't even try with me.
No, absolutely. I don't know. I think Brad Pitt's giving him a run for his money. But the thing with Brad Pitt, I feel like Brad Pitt, he still keeps he hasn't quite gotten into the blockbuster realm quite in the same way Tom Cruise has.
It's weird. I was thinking, how has he never had like a franchise? The closest thing you could say would be like when he did World War Z, and let's just not count that. But I mean, really, he could have been doing, like, I mean, when you think of Brad Pitt, you're like, how have you not done like a superhero movie or something? I'm not saying he should. It's just like, but Tom Cruise is doing, well, not superhero stuff, but he's that big name on the marquee. I remember like seeing Once Upon a Time in Hollywood this year. I'm like, it's like, we need more Brad Pitt in more movies, please. But
yeah, and the funny thing is, it's like film actors like Brad Pitt. I mean, I would like, there are a few performances of this decade I would say are some of my favorite performances. I don't necessarily, and it's weird because to a certain extent I don't know if I would necessarily consider Brad Pitt one of my favorite actors, but he's given enough great performances to where, I probably should be looking at that.
Yeah, no. I agree with you. When I think of it, like, if I'm listing my favorite actors, he's not a name that perfectly comes to mind. But like, when I'm thinking, if you name any of his movies, I'm like, oh yeah, I do love that one. And I'm like, he's that's worth considering. And I'd say the same thing about Tom Cruise. I mean, again, like, if I'm listing like my favorites, it's like, there's the people I'm like, I will go watch any movie that they're in. But I'm like, how often have I been like, I'm not going to go see this because either of them are in it? Because it's like they're two of the most consistently good
Yeah.
actors you can think of, or at least that I can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's one of those things. Yeah, and I mean, it's just kind of amazing when you consider the chances Tom Cruise has had, or the chances Tom Cruise has taken as an actor, and he's still
a lot of that,
managed to maintain being a movie star.
Yeah, because you could think like if you did like you do like a Eyes Wide Shut or a Magnolia, you'd be like, well, you're really gonna keep doing Mission Impossible? Oh yeah, you did Mission Impossible 2 literally the year after.
Yeah.
You know, and like kept the box office coming. But then you, I mean, come on, I watched it. It was not good by any stretch, but I was like, it was at least I was
Yeah.
I could have a drink and fall asleep to it, and I wasn't bored. It just wasn't good. But The Mummy, that was let's be honest, it was a train wreck. But then literally bounces back with the best Mission Impossible film that I've ever seen. Probably one of the best action movies I've ever seen, and one of the best films of the year in the 6th Mission Impossible movie, in my opinion. And I'm like, normally, come on, anyone else that would have been like, yeah, you're not working again. Yeah, but not him. He's like, never mind. I got the ace up the sleeve. It's fine.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the thing that's so interesting about him. It's like the fact that he it's almost like Mission Impossible gives him the sustained success of the Mission Impossible movies just gives him the luxury to do essentially whatever the hell he wants.
Yeah, because I mean, like, and even when I'm trying to think of like the middle of the road ones, like Valkyrie did not do very well, did it?
No.
Yeah, and it's like, and that actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think that was sort of what led to him and Christopher McQuarrie like kind of becoming friends and collaborators, because I think
that was McQuarrie and Bryan Singer collaboration.
Yeah, and then there was something, I forget what, but there was some movie that Tom Cruise was on, and I remember he called up Christopher McQuarrie and said, "Hey, I need you as a favor to do a rewrite on the script that's got issues," and he just did, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh well, they're doing the best Mission Impossible movies. Yeah, have fun, guys. So it's like,
well, and they had done Jack Reacher too. They'd done Jack Reacher,
which
well.
Again, I always forget. I mean, geez, yeah, how many damn franchises are there? Like, I forgot about that one.
But no, you're absolutely right, and yeah, it's. I mean, we could have essentially, like, we've spent half of this podcast just talking about Tom Cruise. There's so much else to talk about, like.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, we could have like these length of discussions literally about any character. I mean, we've kind of touched on all of them, but we haven't really even gone into the nuances of. I mean, we kind of glazed over like a lot, but like you've got I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, every time I think about, well, that storyline, I'm like, oh, that's one of my favorites. But then I start just thinking about like that beautiful, perfect opening of that framework of those stories that sort of set up, like with that narrator, like, it is the humble opinion of this narrator that this cannot be. These things don't just simply happen. No, it can't be that. But it does. And that's what I kind of love. It's like, it's so meta that it's almost like throwing it in your face. Like, hey, you're going to say that this is like far-fetched, but things like this do happen. Like, like you go out to dinner and you have a conversation with somebody and you realize that you've known each other forever, but like you have this like mutual acquaintance, and all of a sudden like, oh crap, we're technically related by marriage through so-and-so because you're okay, cool. I mean, that's kind of a far-fetched, and I didn't really fully connect it. But the point is, like, these little chance circumstances about how we're all interrelated and interconnected, and like I said, just bumping into each other and hoping for the least amount of possible chaos, that happens, and it's like you read about some crazy news article of like, oh, how did that, like that opening about the son that loaded the parent's shotgun because he knew that they were going to fight and he wanted to kill himself, jumped off the building. The mom shot the shotgun. It killed him, and he would have lived if he hadn't been shot because of the safety net down below. And so his mom was arrested for murder of her son, and her son was listed as an accomplice in his own death. And it's like, if you saw that as a news article, you'd be like, yeah, right. But you see shit like that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like this, I love that this movie is just so self-aware that it's not afraid to call attention to all that. Like I said, even so, as when he said, this is the scene in the movie where you help me, or, you know, like, and that's, I'm not trying to jump too far ahead, but that is why two of my favorite scenes in the movie I will defend to my dying day. And again, it's either you're going to be like, yeah, that worked for me, or it didn't. But the bit where they're all singing the same song, sitting in the car, and it's like, you know, it starts off, you know, where it's just, you think it's just a needle drop, you know, over the scene, and, you know, Melora Walters is sitting there like getting ready for her date with John C. Reilly, and she's, you know, just did some cocaine, and was the song "Wise Up," I think?
Yeah, it was "Wise Up."
Yeah, like, and you like, it just starts playing, and you think she's playing it on her radio, but then she starts kind of softly singing along to it and getting a little more into it, and then it cuts on the next verse to like the next character, and each person picks up, and it's like, holy shit, yeah, you worked a musical number into this.
Yeah.
I never would have seen that coming, but literally there's a musical number in the third act. Well, I'm trying to remember if that would be the third act or the end of the second act, because I know the movie's kind of broken up by weather jokes. Yeah. Which we should talk about in a minute too. But like how they're you know, they're singing the same song, and like the idea of like all these people being on this similar wavelength, literally sonically, I think is just very, very beautiful and endearing. And you'd be like, oh, well, that you can say that's coincidence too. Yeah. I would totally buy that, like with the narrative of the movie. But then you have all of a sudden Philip Seymour Hoffman's great line, "How do frogs fall from the sky?" Ignoring all the that scripture reference and all the signs to, like, you know, like this catastrophic storm of, and, you know, okay, we have frogs falling from the sky. You have just about my argument to people when they're like, what the fuck, there are frogs falling from the sky. I'm like, think about all the chance and circumstance in this movie. This movie is literally about chance and circumstance and intersection and coincidence and influence upon, like, you know, like, you don't know. It's like the butterfly effect, you know, everything affects everything. Yeah. And you have just about as much a chance as the extremes of these connections happening as what? Frogs falling out of the sky. It's almost like, sure, why not? I totally buy that. And it's actually interesting because I remember reading it's like a real phenomenon. I think like in the rainforest or somewhere or whatever, like, you know, like there'll be like water spouts or, you know, tornadoes that'll pick up tadpoles and take them up to the clouds, and then they're really light and they sit there and hang out in the clouds until they grow and become too heavy, and then they rain down. Now, they're not fully grown giant frogs to the degree that we get in this movie, but this is just not any. This is, if anything, of course, it's about exaggeration for effect. Yeah. And I remember thinking that was just really kind of beautifully impacting. And this, what the hell is happening, is what sort of culminates and bring these characters together. Jason Robards' character dies, keeps Philip Baker Hall from shooting himself in the head, literally brings the mother back to the daughter so that they can kind of, like, you know, like reconnect as, like, you know, as they're hiding, like causes William H. Macy to have to get braces, brings John C. Reilly's character to him, like, for the sake of kind of giving him a second chance at redemption. Like, it literally, like, that rain sort of which I think ties into that whole, like, verse, is what cleanses all of them in a weird way. Tom Cruise got his catharsis. He got to, Frank got to talk to his dad. The dad got to see him. Like, literally, it is Linda OD, but like the ambulance, you know, picked her up and got her there in time. Yeah. Like it literally cleanses all these characters and gives them a second chance at a happier story in the movie that we don't get to watch. Yeah, and I think that is hauntingly beautiful.
Yeah, I'll admit I'll admit the Rain of Toads or the Rain of Frogs was one of those things where even this time I'm like, what the hell? But that's an accurate reaction. But the thing is, it's like seeing all of those things happen now this time. It's like, oh, okay, I see where this is coming about. I don't have as strong a reaction to that as you do, but I do appreciate the way he brings so many of these characters' arcs to a different place and to a better place as they and the place where they need to. Would be the better way of putting it.
Right.
I will say though, I 110% agree with you on the Wise Up. The Wise Up medley, or with all of the characters singing that song. It's probably it's without doubt one of the most emotional moments in the film.
Absolutely.
It's wonderful in seeing how connected these characters are when it comes to the emotions that they're feeling. It's painful to feel that the emotions these characters are feeling in the moment, and it's just a beautiful song. It's a combination. It's what makes the great musical moments in movie musicals so great.
Yeah. Oh no. I completely agree with you. Like it's the fact that is kind of a bold and unpredictable choice to all of a sudden shift to we're literally going to have that musical number there. That is the moment that works.
Right.
Like I can almost like just picture him as he's writing it, like, the temptation of, yeah, they're going to all sing this, like because it's like I need a moment that's sort of like it's almost like a reprise, like to recap where all these characters are. And I'm again, because I know you said like, yeah, it does work for me a little more, where they are literally before the storm.
Yeah.
And it's like this moment of, it's like, actually shit. I just realized if we're going to be literal, that is the calm before the storm. That is the moment. That is the moment before. We've been having influences intersections, but at this point we are going to have a crash at the intersections. Like of everybody, like, just this is, no one's going to be the same. Everything's going to be changed. And that it's like this beautiful, soft moment that they share, even though none of them are sharing the screen together.
Yeah.
With the exception of Philip Seymour Hoffman and Jason Robards, obviously, like that was, which I think that's kind of interesting. That is the only one where you get two characters singing at the same time.
Yeah.
Everyone else is sort of individualized.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of curious to me to swing back for a second to Stanley that he ends it.
Yeah.
Because everybody sings a verse, but all he gets is give up at the end.
Mm-hmm.
He gets that line so just, and it cuts to him, give up, and then that slow, shot of him. I think it was a pullback if I remember correctly. But like you have between that and oh shit, hang on, I'm going down a rabbit hole here. I don't really know what my point is because I'm realizing and figuring out something. But it's like that musical number ends with him, but so does the Rain of Frogs.
Yeah,
because it pushes in on it. It pushes in on him up over that plant, and he says, "This happens. This is a thing that happens." And then the frogs start falling in slow motion.
Yeah,
I feel like I don't know why, but there's some I never caught it before, but there's got to be some significance as to him ending both of those sequences because I feel like they're directly connected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, his character almost feels like he's not a narrator, but in a weird way, he's almost like a tie that binds.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I can elaborate on that much more. That's just sort of what it feels like.
Well, and it's funny because of the fact that you brought up the opening where with all of the coincidences and all of that stuff. The narration in that, by the way, is by the amazing Ricky Jay, who actually appears on screen in this movie. Is one of the handlers on the game show, and I mean that just sets the tone for the entire movie. Really, that entire introduction and him the way he's able to. The way the intonation of his voice, the way he projects his voice, and just his ability to tell his story is one of the most pleasurable things I think a filmmaker can add to a movie is Ricky Jay in some capacity. And I mean,
he's fantastic.
David Mamet forever, and he worked with Chris Nolan in Prestige, and he's worked with Paul Thomas Anderson a couple of times.
Yeah, well, yeah, because he was in Boogie Nights too.
Yeah. And we were talking about music. We were talking about Amy Mann's music. I love the use of "One Is the Loneliest Number" at the beginning of this movie.
Oh God, yeah, that's such a great cover, and yeah, the use of that, which, yeah, when you think about it, like really fits the movie and is a good initial tone to start on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like her music fits that so damn well.
Yeah, it really is.
And I think, with the exception of one, like I think they were all original songs written for the movie, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I think
but
that's probably right.
But yeah, when it first like cuts to black and you hear that the first after the narration, you hear the prologue and you hear the first notes of one start, and then the magnolia blooming and the title, and then you get that little quick welcome to the jungle introduction of all the characters.
Yeah.
Just set that, like, yeah, he's one of the better masters of the needle drop, in my opinion. But I mean, like, her music tied into that, and thinking about how that ends with the first thing after that intro, after one ends, you get like whatever percent cloudy, chance of rain. Like when you start getting all the title cards of, what the weather's like. Yeah. And then I think the next one we get is going into the studio with Stanley with the game show, which at the time it's been outdone. But
yeah,
like, when I'm breaking things up by like title cards, I remember thinking that one-er, that continuous take that they do, like starting out in the rain up to then getting on the elevator and following him all the way up to like, the game show before that first cut. Yeah. I was like, holy shit, that was a good take. Now I've seen, we've seen some very, how the hell did you do that stuff since then, which it's always interesting to see when that gets one up, because I'm like, oh, that movie did it better. That movie did it better. Like, what was it, episode 6 of The Haunting of Hill House this past year? I'm like, no one's going to beat that. So, yeah, but the weather, because I kind of touched on that a little bit. Like, I'm trying to figure out, it's interesting because that culminates with the frogs, and then it's almost like at the end, it's like clear skies. So It's like we're building towards this, like, almost like biblical storm. And then eventually, like, we get to clear skies, which is this like idea of hope. He has a lot of interesting narrative framing devices happening here.
Yeah, it really does. And and the thing is, I think the weather was one where it's like I didn't really think about it so much rewatching it. I'm just like, okay, this is this and I think I sort of tied it into the culmination of the raining of the frogs, but yeah, I mean, I didn't necessarily think about that as a framing device, but yeah, it really kind of is, because it is everything is building to that scene. Yeah. And that's one of the more interesting things. And although and we talked about the music, and Amy Mann's music is fantastic for this movie. Like, the use of it is really fantastic. I will admit, like, I'm not, as much as I like John Bryan as a composer, I'm not a huge fan of the way the score's used. I feel like, to a certain extent, it's a little too insistent. It really centers in on the melodramatic aspects of the movie.
Oh, no, it's like heavily, like, emotional. It's not subtle, but like, like a lot of the stuff in the like, for instance, that sequence I was talking about with that continuous take, like leading up to the game show, like that first time that Stanley goes there, I thought that bit of score was really great. The score leading up to the frogs at the end, where like basically where Frank is crying over his father dying, when he's like, I'm not going to cry for you, and he's just like clasping his hands and fighting for it. The way that swells is, come on, like that I was like, that is a perfect culmination of shot, direction, script, performance, score. Like the score right there is actually part of what breaks me. Just the way that swells when he's crying, and that how it sort of changes notes on that transition when he's like, I'm not gonna cry for you, you cocksucker, and then he says then he starts to cry and he goes no, and then he says, don't leave me, and he, like, the way that he dovetails from I hate to don't go, that he's not ready to say goodbye, when he's like, I hate you, but please don't go. Like, the score like kind of finessing that scene is a large part of what hits me. Like I'm kind of getting chills thinking about it right now. So while I don't disagree with what you're saying, I got to give it props to there are moments where it is uncomfortably effective.
Yeah.
But it's not subtle. You're right. It does kind of play into melodrama. Like I've got the soundtrack, and it's half score, half Amy Mann's songs. It's like a double album, but like it's one that I like to go and visit every once in a while, but it always just makes me want to watch the movie. So
yeah, I think one of the things that sort of kept this film that might have kept this film at arm length for me the first time around, and I kind of noticed it this time around, was it really feels, to a certain extent, it feels like there are more montages than developed scenes. We get the characters developed, but I don't necessarily feel like the scenes are, to a certain extent, some of the scenes are not fleshed out in the way that you would kind of hope for a streamlined narrative. I mean, it's not a streamlined narrative, but
right, but you're not wrong.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's an unusual narrative. It's an unusual storytelling device on Anderson's part.
It's very, actually, I got an interesting thought on that. It's very, or at least I think it's interesting. I'm not saying it will be, but like I think that you're right. It is interesting because in a unique way of portraying things, because it is very montage or I'd say even vignette based, where you just get like little glimpses and everything. But I noticed something this time where I was kind of, because I really got hooked on or pointed towards that musical number, like that. It stood out more than it ever has, and I've always loved it. I was like, that's if I'm ranking probably like my favorite scenes or sequences in a movie, like in movie history, I probably on some list at some point would include that one.
Yeah.
And I realized we were thinking about the score, and I kind of felt, I'm like, man, everything's like so operatic, even to the point where like they're referencing Carmen, like in when the little boy, when Stanley answers that, and then the next scene where John C. Reilly is wanting coffee is like set to that opera. The movie almost kind of plays and feels, and I'm not a student of music theory or anything, but the movie sort of plays like music feels to me, if that makes sense.
I get that.
Honestly, like the way it kind of builds and swells, it feels like movements, and something classical, or it feels like, verses and refrains and choruses and outros, it's like this lingering, I don't know much about opera, but it feels like what I think an opera is.
Yeah.
It is like visual music for me.
I think that's
the film feels like that structurally.
I think that's a very fair assessment of it, and I think that's a very valid assessment of it. It's one of those things where because of the fact that it does go. There are times where it does go for big emotional moments. There are some times where it goes for quieter emotional moments that feel big. And I mean, in that way, it absolutely fits that idea of musical theater. And it's really, it really, I mean, all of this is seriously making me want to revisit the movie again.
Me too, man. I'm loving this talk.
It's just one of those things where it's a very interesting way of approaching it. It's an interesting way of approaching cinema, and I think that's one of the things that's really exciting about Paul Thomas Anderson as a filmmaker, is the way he uses music. And even whether, Boogie Nights and Heart 8 are arguably probably his most conventional uses of music. And
I mean, those things play. That's the thing, is those movies, and I mean this is a compliment, not like a dig. I'm not like taking it down a peg. Yeah. Those movies play like a mixtape. Yeah. Like they play like a really good mixtape to me. But this plays like I don't know, like a symphony, or it's like, oh well, this is like a piece of a larger whole that's like, broken down into movements and nuances. Like when you feel like you're listening to like how something sort of evolves, and you have this part that is, faster, that doesn't quite fit in this part that is kind of like long and languid and like slow and patient. And, like this ebb and flow of pacing, where there's long stretches in the movie where nobody's talking, and there's parts where it's like rapid fire. And Paul Thomas Anderson's always been good at that, because like if I'm thinking of the best like needle drop directors, or people that know how to use music, of course I'm going to be thinking of like a Scorsese or Tarantino, or like but like I'm going to include him in that conversation. And it's because I don't disagree with you. Like Boogie Nights and Hard Eight are great, but I don't know how to say it other than that's more like a mixtape as opposed to like a composed piece of music, or like an opera or something. Again, coming from I'm trying to talk intelligently about music when I'm a film guy. So, but I know when I listen to it, like how I emotionally respond to what I'm hearing.
So as somebody who studied film or music in college, I can say that you're on the right track. I do feel like you're very much on the right track when you're talking about this and likening it to music. I think there's definitely something there when it comes to that. I mean, you look at Punch Drunk Love and the way he uses the Willie Nelson song, the way John Bryan's score really goes into the emotions on a pretty hard-edged feel. Even when the movie is really sweet, it gets really sweet, but also when that rage starts to come out of Barry, the Adam Sandler character, it really gets really intense. And it's the way the music is used in There Will Be Blood.
The
Master,
yes, that
Femme Thread.
It is so. Yeah, There Will Be Blood in particular. There's that movie sounds so unique. It sounds like the character. Like there's parts on the landscape where you've got Daniel Day-Lewis just walking across the frame, and the music. I'm like, that's what it sounds like when he walks. Like I don't. It just fits. It's just so uniquely God, I love that movie. See, okay, now I want to go watch Punch Drunk Love and There Will Be Blood and like all these, and like
I know.
It's making me want to go do like a PTA like film festival.
But I mean, that's one of the things that I've come to really appreciate about him as a filmmaker is the fact that his movies are so unique, and it started with Punch Drunk Love. I couldn't get that. That
one's really underrated.
And I wasn't a huge Adam Sandler fan at the time. I mean, I had mixed feelings on him overall, but like his comedies never really did much for me. So
sure, but when you see that, I remember thinking, "Holy shit, he can do that!"
Yeah,
like what?
And then you have There Will Be Blood, which is just this remarkable epic, and it's essentially about two people. It's got big images, it's got big ideas, it's a sprawling epic in a lot of ways. It boils down to two people. And the master, is a little bit more intimate. It's got more, but it has a big time frame and, again, big ideas that's sort of approaching when it comes to the character of Freddy, Joaquin Phoenix's character in that movie. And then Femme Thread, you just have this triangle of characters and their emotions and the way those play out. It's just really, you are always going to get something unique when it comes to Paul Thomas Anderson's movies. And I mean, even in rewatching it, it's like even if I don't love the movie, I can at least admire it for that. Like, it's still unlike anything else I think I've ever seen.
Exactly, and they're like the furthest opposite thing of like disposable entertainment, because on each rewatch you're like, you notice something different, or you like it a little bit more. And like I said, they're films of his films. I feel like I can grow with them, some more than others, but like they feel timeless. Now, I have only seen The Master, Inherent Vice, and Phantom Thread. I've only seen each of those once.
Yeah.
I have never like disliked any of his movies, but those are the ones that I'm like are still kind of freshest in the roster. Everything else I've kind of rewatched and dissected to death over the years. But yeah, no, like I've never not been rewarded with something different or new, or at least like kind of re-fallen in love and discovered something else like on a rewatch. Like they are. I mean, I think the worst thing that you can say, like, I mean, and don't get me wrong, we've all had those films where you watch it and you're like, it was fine. I mean, you get a you could have to say like that was crap, and you watch it later and you're like, I was wrong. This was actually really good because your taste has changed. You could have the opposite where, I really like this, and you see it later and you're like, what was I thinking? Because my taste has changed.
Yeah.
Or you get stuck in that really depressing middle ground where you watch it and you're like, it was fine. It wasn't bad.
Yeah.
But you're like, I don't ever need to see it again. And I've had so many films like that. Some I've even just bought because I'm like, well, I like the cinematography, and like, so-and-so's in it, and I want to revisit it someday, but I don't. Yeah. Because, it's like, it was perfectly fine, but I'm done with it. Like I like, as opposed to his, they stick with you. And I find myself thinking about them. Like I've been thinking, even though I've seen it over and over and over again, I've been thinking about that film since I watched it, anxious to talk with you about it because there's so much to discuss. And I'm like, well, but then you could say, well, like, what's there to discuss? You've seen this over and over. I've talked about this movie with friends. I'm not saying anything really new, but at the same time I am, as I'm talking out loud with you, I'm realizing things like, oh shit, I picked up on that. And I'm just now connecting some of these dots, and it's making me excited and wanting to go back and watch it again with that filter and, see what else I can pick up on. And like, if maybe that thought or that analysis is flawed, or there's some little further I can go down the rabbit hole with it. Like it's like at the time, and this actually kind of ties into a little bit what we talked about with actually 99 was like a really big year, not just for films, but like I said, for me as a filmmaker, because I went to college, hadn't decided yet that I wanted to be a filmmaker. I say to myself, I'm an independent filmmaker. I'm not. That's not a bragging thing. Like I'm never going to be a pimple on the ass of Paul Thomas Anderson. Like I make the shit that I make, and I have fun doing it. I remember thinking like my taste was, it's fine, and I still like it, but it was shit. Like if it didn't have tits or explosions, and like I didn't really care about it. Like in high school, I was like, action movies and Bond flicks and everything. I was your prototypical teenage guy that was just like, this is just like a disposable entertainment, And then freshman year of college, I started, like I said, seeing all the stuff that made me realize, hang on, it's stupid. And now if like somebody said to me, I'm like, yeah, you dumbass, of course it is. But it's like, it's an art form, like I hadn't at that point discovered that differentiation or symbiosis of art and entertainment.
Yeah.
That something can be both. And I remember just realizing, I can literally tie it to, it was, it's gonna sound pretentious as hell, but like it fits for me. Like I remember it was, I had a cinematography professor freshman year of college that showed me The Seventh Seal and 8.5. Those were two of the films on the list, and I saw those and I was like, I had no idea what just happened. And those films stuck with me. That was me on the path to realizing Bergman is my favorite filmmaker of all time. And like, okay, I don't understand what I just watched, but I'm fascinated by it and I want to know why I am. And that language of, this is a movie? Wait, what's a movie? What's a film? Is that the same thing? Is it just a medium? Are you like saying like, and, people back then were like, well, there's a difference between movies and films. So it's very pretentious. I'm like, no, it's all just, it's an hour and a half or 2 hour thing you watch. What's happening here? But I realized that there is such a thing as it can be entertainment, but it can also be art. And like, that's the difference of, and I'm not trying to be like I said, like overly inflated about this idea, but I love escapism, like that's part of the reason I watch movies. Like I said, as the Mission Impossible last one, Fallout, was, I think, a really good marriage of both. But like, I'll sit there and enjoy a popcorn flick as much as someone else. Like, I can't tell you how excited I am for Bad Boys for Life, and I'm not embarrassed about it because I've got a Bad Boys 2 poster hung up in my apartment right now. It's all great. My taste is so all over the board. I really enjoy escaping and just like, vegging out to a movie as much as the next person. But I love it when something challenges me, where it's like, it's a little more than, I can watch it in the background, or, it's not just about getting that adrenaline rush, where it's something about, and I found this really interesting with that whole, not to go, I'm all over the map here, and I apologize, but like the whole recent thing about Scorsese making the comments about Marvel. Now, remember, I love Marvel movies. Endgame is one of my favorite films of the year. I'm sure we're going to disagree, but like that's one of a couple 5-star films I've done this year. And like, I love that stuff, but I understand what he was saying, because he was talking about how films need to, he thinks like, cinema is responsible to sort of challenge the human condition. Like there's this saying I love that, which I think, art should disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed, or something like that. I might be paraphrasing that wrong, but I remember the first time I read that, like the intent behind that really resonated with me. And that's what I felt like when I realized, oh shit, cinema is my favorite art form. I think it's the ultimate art form for me. I'm not going to say that to like a painter or a musician, but I'm like, to me it is. Like art is art. But all this to be said, in a very long-winded way of getting around to my point, Paul Thomas Anderson for me is in every definition of the word a true artist. Yeah. And I happen to be entertained by his work at the same time. But like, art is in the eye of the beholder, because like, you could watch, the cheesiest B-movie schlock, which I love watching. Yeah. I did a Halloween horror binge. I think I told you I watched a horror movie every day in October, and I had one night that was just cheesy 80s horror night, and we watched we watched a lot of Jim Wynorski movies, and I have fun doing that, because you can find artistry in anything, but like PTA is just like, he is for me like one of the penultimate like ideas of what an artist is as far as a filmmaker. And there's my whole weird roundabout long-winded rant of me gushing over how I think that he's genius. So anyway,
no, that's quite all right, and I think that's a really great place to end this. I mean, we could go on about it, but I mean, if you haven't seen Magnolia, I would, and especially if you're a fan of Paul Thomas Anderson, chances are you've seen Magnolia, and it's a big part of why you're a fan of his. If you haven't seen Magnolia, first of all, I don't know why you listened to us for almost 2 hours. But at the same time, it's well worth watching. It's well worth watching for a lot of reasons that we've illuminated here, as well as a lot of things that we probably could go on about. And with all that being said, thank you very much for joining me again, Jacob. I always love talking to you about movies. I know we've got one more release coming up, and I'm looking forward to that discussion when it happens as well.
I am too, man. Anytime.
I'd like to thank Jacob for joining me tonight to discuss Magnolia. It was a big conversation, but I'm really glad we had it. This is a movie that I will probably end up revisiting here shortly. Because of the fact that there's kind of a lot to discuss with it and to think about with it. And that's it for now for the Sonic Cinema podcast. There's some more for the class of 1999 that I want to get to this year, and I hope we can get to all of it. And I hope you enjoy it. Check us out at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema, as well as www.sonic-cinema.com. Thank you very much.